Okay. All right. So we got up to page Samach Gimel, and again, what we're talking about the comparison. He's developing this mahalach that Shabbos is similar in many ways, many facets to the Beis Hamikdash, and we talked about we went through almost all the vessels in the Beis Hamikdash and drew that comparison. And now he's going to talk about the two components of Shabbos, Zochar and Shamor, Avoda Ma'asis, Zochar and Shamor, and talk about what the unique quality of Shabbos is expressed in these two ideas. Where does Zochar and Shamor appear? So the Aseret Dibros appears twice in the Torah. It's perfect. You don't have to add anything to it. So it appears twice in the Torah, in Sefer Shmos and in Sefer Devarim, and there are a number of differences between the ways in which the Aseret Dibros are written out. Bob has spent a lot of time on this subject, but one of the most famous distinctions between the Aseret Dibros the first time and the second time is the fact that Shamor, it says Shamor in one, it says Zochar in the other, right? Guard the Shabbos, remember the Shabbos. Traditionally, Chazal understand that one is referring to the mitzvahs essay, the positive commandments of Shabbos, or at least the ways in which you consecrate Shabbos positively. The others would refer to guarding yourself against violating the Shabbos. We think of Shabbos, we usually think of Lamed Malachos, don't violate these 39 commandments. And of course, there's a whole slew of mitzvahs essay. Some of them are din d'Rabbanan, some of them din d'Oraisa, some of them from the Torah, some of them from the rabbis, based on psukim in Tanakh. But those positive commandments refer to things like Hadlakas Neros, Mitzvah Kiddush, Oneg Shabbos, Kavod Shabbos. Distinction between Kavod and Oneg Shabbos is usually we say Kavod Shabbos is what you do in advance of Shabbos to prepare. Oneg Shabbos is what you do on Shabbos itself to celebrate Shabbos. So the only one that's the crossover is Hadlakas Neros. When you light the candles, you're fulfilling, perhaps, as some Rishonim say, you're perhaps fulfilling Kavod Shabbos, but once they're lit at your table, you're fulfilling Oneg Shabbos, right? So that's when you exhaust yourself during the week, so you can nap on Shabbos. Maybe you're doing Kavod in advance, so you're doing Oneg Shabbos and Shabbos. But those are the mitzvahs essay of Shabbos.
Sounds like Kiddush might be also Kiddush.
Yeah.
But you also he said it's one of the mitzvahs to Rabbanan, or is it not?
What is?
Or mitzvah.
There are certain components of Kavod Oneg that fall under the Rabbanan. In other words, how we talk, how we behave on Shabbos, not running around on Shabbos and exercising in the same way we do during the week. Speaking about certain topics, Daber Davar, the pasuk says, don't speak about the stock market and things like that. Those would be fall under the category of Kavod Shabbos, but those are not Doraisa. Because the pasuk with Daber Davar
is considered Doraisa.
Yeah. So when you make Kiddush, it's Doraisa. Correct. That's correct. Right. Some of them are Derabanan. Okay. So now Tanach le'inyanenu. We're going to return back to our topic. Ma b'diuk osim Shabbos. What exactly do we do when it comes to Shabbos? Okay. It's the Zochim l'Kabbalas Kiddush Shabbos. How are we lucky enough? How do we merit to do a Kabbalah Shabbos? And we're not talking about just reciting the Kabbalah Shabbos on Friday night. Avodas Shabbos morkeves mishtei peulos ikarios. That the work that we do on Shabbos involves two overriding components, two fundamental ideas. You have to know there's a Shabbos. Ruki Hashem nasan lachem is a Shabbos. Pasuk says, "Im lo yodim shezu Shabbos, im achas no yodeh shekal nimtzeis lo ya'azar klum." Right. So in other words, if you don't know where you're holding, it doesn't help at all. We talked about the Gemara where a person's lost in the desert. It was that in this year we spoke about this. And you don't know, the Gemara tells us that if you're lost, you don't know what day it was, you lost track of Shabbos, so you start counting from the day in which you lost track, and then you go to 7. There's machlokas. Do you start right away to Shabbos, or do you count 7 days? When you get to Shabbos, the point is you have to have an awareness of Shabbos. That's based on the pasuk Ru'u ki Hashem nas lachem Shabbos. And then, if you don't know, right, then it's like the Chatan not knowing who the Kala is, because the Shabbos is called the Kala. Lifnei kol tzrichim. So first of all, you have to be aware of this, and you have to believe that it's something that to almost save or help you to bring to greatness and closeness to Hashem more than any other time. There's a special connection that we foster on Shabbos. Second of all, once we know it's Shabbos, then the action is Yitziras Pratis Beinenu Levin Hashem Yisparach, there is a private connection which is fostered between us and Hashem. There's something special, a special bond that has been created. Okay. And this is a theme that keeps recurring, coming back to it. Every yontiv has its own mitzvah, right? We spoke about the chefsa de mitzvah in halachic terminology. There's the lulav and the esrog and the sukkah, and then you have the shofar and you have matzah. Every yontiv has a chefsa de mitzvah. I once heard the chefsa de mitzvah of Yom Kippur is the Shem Hashem, because when the Kohen Gadol says the Shem Hashem, what you're doing is you are sanctifying the Shem Hashem in that moment. He says the Shem Hashem and everyone bows, right? So the name of God is the object of mitzvah in Yom Kippur. People make the mistake; they think the object of the mitzvah is fasting. It's not true. It's the utterance of the Shem Hashem. But anyway,
Even today when they're
right. So
like the Chava.
right. Well, it's the chefs mitzvah of Shavuos isn't learning Torah. It's the shtei halechem and the kifset seres. It's two karbanos that we don't offer anymore. So yeah, there's parts of our observances that we just don't have anymore. And we commemorate them in other ways, through the davening and through
Then that becomes the main.
the davening has been the replacement of a lot of the things that we can't do. Roughly 1/3 or so of the Torah that's karbanos. So we now commemorate that through tefillah. Right? When Shalem Misfasenu, Parim Misfasenu, the pasuk says that our lips now are the hashlama, the completion of the cows that we can't offer anymore. So yeah, so there's that. But the point is that on every holiday has a unique mitzvah. What's the one mitzvah? What's the mitzvahs aseh of Shabbos? So l'Shabbos yeshna mitzvahs aseh achas. There's one positive commandment, the lav echad, and there's one negative commandment. So what's he talking about? He says if you want to summarize all the negative commandments of Shabbos, the 39 malachos and all the sub malachos, the toldos, it all fits under one category, and all the positive commandments fit under one category. The mitzvah shel Shabbos is zachor is yom Shabbos. The mitzvah of Shabbos is to remember the Shabbos, and the lav, the negative command, is shomer yom Shabbos, lo lachalo, not to disgrace the Shabbos. Now, how are you shomer Shabbos? What does that mean? It means you have to study all the lamites malachos. You have to know all the dinim and all the pratim, all the details. But the positive and negative commandments that are associated with Shabbos really fit under two mitzvos. And if you look at the Rambam introduces any set of halachos for anything in his Mishnah Torah. He always says, how many mitzvahs are there? And if it's Shabbos, he'll tell you right away, there's a positive and there's a negative, there's a shomer and there's a zachar. Right? And then part of that is there's a number of different ways to fulfill those. Hamila Shabbos Yimiloshin Shvisa. The word Shabbos itself means to stop. Shabbos. We know Hashem performed malacha for 6 days, and the seventh day he stopped. Nach mimena ma pashar davar. What does this mean? Was he tired? Did he need to rest? Why does it say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to take a nap? So you say, Mizu. Furthermore, we have another question. The Gemara Menachos tells us that God created the world through the recitation of the letters Yud and Hey. This is a sort of this almost like a Kabbalistic concept, and much of Chabad, begins in the Balatanya, in the Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. He develops this idea. Now, God used letters to create the universe. I remember there was a TV show for kids where they would spell out the name. You would see a dog, and his body was made of the letters D-O-G, or cat. See, what was that called? Word World, right? It's not as popular anymore, but
It was after your kids.
right. So the Zohar has this concept that God utters letter, and it's also in the Gemara Menachos. Evidently, Hashem created the world through letters, and B'Tzalel, when he created the Mishkan, used the very same formulations, the same letters to be able to create the Mishkan. That's why you have all these connections between the Mishkan and Shabbos, right?
He said them like Hashem said.
Well, he understood. He was able to mechaven to those osios, to whatever that means. So, on a very simple level, when God creates the snake and he says Nun Ches Shin, I don't know if that's what he did, and then somehow that became a physical manifestation. The osios are Kodesh. The letters are Kodesh. That's why we have Hashem creates the world in 10 ma'amarim, in 10 utterances. Didn't say, the far side where it says God creates a snake and it shows a bearded man on a cloud,
Yeah.
rolling together, and these things are a cinch. It's not that he created, took a physical clump of clay and then rolled it into a shape. It's that there was some sort of spiritual creation that happened through God's Amira. Hashem's words are kiviyachol actions. And then, Ayidei ha-hey baras kol habriya, that through the Yud and the Hey, that those two letters itself, Hashem created the whole world. The Bria was the Hey, because in Kabbalistic terms, this is not where we spend most of the time on this stuff, but the Hey is a vessel. If you look at the Hey, it's shaped like a vessel. There are openings, but the Hey always represents the world. And the Yud is Shechina. It's the divine entity reaching down, but not yet making to this world. And that's why a Vav, you need the Vav Hey to draw it down completely. It's the Yud, it's the Shechina that's coming down, and the Vav draws it down into this world. So we have a Yud and a Hey, a vessel, but most people can't capture that vessel. So then the Vav Hey draws it down into this world, and that's where we interact in the physical world. So there are 4 layers of interpretation, 4 layers of olamos, and the lowest level, the world of Asiya, the world of the practical world, where we interact. We see tables and bagels and cream cheese and coffee, but on a higher plane, they represent something else. And each physical thing has a spiritual counterpart on each level until it ultimately comes back to God's words. So kol hayikum v'al yidei hayud bara es olam haba. The yud was the olam haba. Rei afilu adam im haya omer es haos hey. I don't know if he translates this stuff, but if God said just the word hey, b'meshech yom shalem lo haya mitayef. Now, if we tried that, right? Think about now Betzalel trying to channel that, or a human being said that, okay, I'm going to replicate God's actions. I'm going to come into a big open hole. I'm going to go, hey, right? So what would happen? Nothing. I wouldn't be tired. I wouldn't be exhausted. I'd be fine. I wouldn't need a day of rest. So it's a great question. So if God needed to rest, which we don't really think he needed to rest, but what did he need to rest from? Let's break it down. What was he doing that was so exhausting? If you look in the Shar Yichud Emunah of the Balatanya, he talks about this idea that what happens if God would have removed the letter for a moment, like what happens if you have a stone, Evan, and he removed the Nun, you have a father, an Av, right? Or if you move the Aleph, you have a Ben. He doesn't say this, but basically the entire form changes, right? The entire form of what has been created. If for a single moment God stopped willing this table to exist, all the items would just fall to the ground suddenly. It would never have been and will be, and it will be kind of, it just will cease to exist. And that's why the Gemara says that when the Yam Suf opened up, so it wasn't that suddenly he changed nature in that moment. It was an aberration. It's that time, there was a time delay, put a timer in, and there were pins set up, and before the Brias Olam, and then at the moment, at the right time, the Yam Suf split open. That was all incorporated within the right. So that's the concept that the Balatanya says, that these letters, if Hashem suddenly stopped uttering them, it would be ka'efes ka'ayin mamish. It would cease to exist in all of reality and memory. El sheshvisa ein perusha menucha. So resting doesn't mean God needs to rest. Kim hafsaka, it means cessation, stopping labor. Sheshes yamim Hashem bara olam. For 6 days God creates the world. B'yom harishon et hashamayim v'zaretz. The first day, the heavens and the earth. Yom hasheni hivdil ben mayim l'mayim. On the second day, water and water. He split between the waters. This is the source of why divisiveness is so painful for us.
What is it?
Well, we don't like division, right? So the second day is associated with division because Hashem created separate.
Why does he not say light and dark or the choshech?
Why Shamayim v'aretz? Because there was Or v'choshech originally, which was mixed in. In other words, you're right. You could really say he just separated, and then you had light and day. He separated. The first day is a separation of time. If you think about it, right? So if you want to say light and dark, it's time. But here he's saying it's heaven and earth. It's 2 different domains. Okay, but okay, Shani, it's 2 different things. Shamayim v'aretz are not dark and night, dark and light. Okay, the second day he created between water and water. Third day, Desh of Eitzim, the vegetation, the trees. Yom Revi, Ma'orot, the lights. Yom Chamishi, Dagim and Tziporim, fish and birds. This is how MC Escher could paint that, painting with the birds and the fish going in and out. U'besof, B'yom Hashishi, et HaChayot, ve'et HaAdam. So the 6th day was the higher level animated creatures, animals, and man. Every day he was involved in creation and generating creation. In the 7th day, then he goes back to his highest level, his gadlut.
If Hashem stopped, like we're saying, then why didn't everything just?
Oh, so that's a good question. I mean, he set it up. Meaning yeah, it was set up in that way. He's continuing. Oh, you mean on Shabbos? Why didn't everything stop?
Yeah, if Hashem was like, okay, I'm not here on the phone.
So
why didn't we just go?
I think he's going to go into that a little bit. Let's table that question. I'm not sure based on that. But Zui Shabbos. That's Shabbos. Okay, so for 6 days we're living in this world. Yotzim la'asakim. We go out to business. Amelim havi parnasa, to bring a money home. Kimuvan, and we talked about, by the way, remember that idea that the Gemara says that uluvu alai, that on Shabbos it's not on our cheshbon. It's like the Rockefeller told you to make a wedding for his son, and you said, "Well, I don't have the money to make a wedding for Rockefeller," and he says, "No, it's on my cheshbon. I just want you to put it together, right?" Could you imagine, like running it like an old style shul, like doilies and a couple bagels and things like that? And he says, "My cheshbon. You're not paying for it." Hashem says, "I don't charge you for anything you spend on Shabbos. That's not part of the cheshbon." So, for 6 days we live in this world. We go out to business. We also daven 3 times a day. Sof kol sof, at the end of the day, the sanctity we experience even during the week, we recite a bracha, we daven, we learn. That's a sanctity of this world. That's holiness in our world. Shabbos Kodesh. On Shabbos, we go back to a holiness that is endowed by God. When God stops the creation, then we do the same thing on Shabbos. We go away from we go away from, just as Hashem went back to his own sanctity. He left the chol, and he went to his sanctity, his place of greatness. So too we do that as well. So what does that mean? We have something special on Shabbos. The Dor Kodman in previous generations, you get up in the morning, you go to the Sados Marad, you go out in the field, you would graze your cattle and harvest your grain. Kama Gadol, Kama Amok, Haya Olam Shelo. How great, how deep was his world? Kama Anyen Haya Ha'olam Shelo. How profound was his world? Shiklal Sichlal Pero Tarnagolat, right? That he had his fruits, his rooster. In other words, it wasn't so hard. He's saying it wasn't so hard to detach oneself from that world, because you didn't have much of a world. You knew what you knew. Yeah? You didn't live in the universe of the internet. You didn't live in the metaverse of Facebook, right? You lived just in your own Daled Amot, which were extended to your field, maybe the marketplace, right? You knew everyone. You married your third cousin. That was the way it worked. The Dora Madarni.
No, he's saying how great and deep was his world, how ancient was his world.
It's a rhetoric question. Didn't go that far, right? That's it. The Dora Madarni in our modern world, though, and he's writing this maybe 20 years ago, though. Adam Kam Beyom Arishon Beboker. So in the morning, Putech Iton, opens up a newspaper, Makiv Kol. He's now reading the news of the whole world, right? We woke up this morning, we heard about bombings in Israel. That's the first thing we heard this morning. So that means that someone sent a text, right? Something exploded, and then within 3 minutes, the whole world knew about it. That's amazing. You wouldn't know about, the Titanic for weeks.
It really
Two bus bombs. Yeah, by bus stops. They were timed. They were time delays. They were talking about time delays. They were bombs that were just placed there and then detonated from afar, which is more frightening, because at least back in the good old days, they used to kill themselves in the process. Right? Okay. Anyway, so you open your newspaper and you see what's going on in the world. Mador Shalem al Gadlan. I don't know what the Rosh was.
In modern world, there's such a grip on this.
Okay, yeah. So b'Shabbos einenu osim davar. So there's such an all-encompassing nature to the world today that it's impossible to feel disengaged from that. Okay, so we have to completely detach ourselves in the world. It is so difficult for a teenager today who grew up in that world. We didn't grow up with that, but who grew up with this to think about putting down the phone for Shabbos. Doesn't make sense because someone's explained to me that's how teenagers communicate. A lot of us communicate now, right? I can't get anyone on the phone anymore. Everything's text. But I think I don't want to sound like old, cranky old man. But the truth is, I am. The truth is that at least we grew up without it. Or at least we value a phone call. But they don't have that in their lexicon, and so to detach from that is painful, right? It's not like they're being mechal Shabbos. They want to violate Shabbos. Right. Well, back in the day when we wanted to violate Shabbos, really you had to sneak out, you had to do something sort of underhanded, and you get in the car. You don't tell anyone. You turn on it was like a whole thing. One time we were little, we wanted to watch the Saturday morning cartoons, which we heard were so great. So we left the TV on and we put a blanket over it. And then we were sick that morning, and we got to watch Popeye. And that was rebelliousness. Until my father found out, it was the end of the world. But the point is that to be Michal Shabbos meant an active knowledge of that idea, right? Here, it's like this is their whole world is so connected to their own personalities that to detach from that is almost impossible. And how do you get rid of that? How do you detach from that world? That's on Shabbos. What can't we do on Shabbos? We don't plow. We don't seed, we don't build homes, we don't write. These are things that a lot of us don't do anymore, but okay. But what is malacha? Malacha is defined as maleches machsheves. It's a Gemara in Shabbos. Maleches machsheves means an action of positive action of creativity. That's maleches machsheves. So that's why if I have a plastic bag of plasticware, spoons, forks, I could rip it open and shred the bag because it's a destructive act. It's not a constructive act. The only question is if I have like a real can or a bottle and I'm opening up, am I doing constructive act or destructive act? That's the question the post can deal with, because is it malachas machshavas or is it not? Is it destructive? But a destructive act is not malacha. So on Shabbos, I'm preventing myself, refraining from creative activity. Not to undermine the beauty of Shabbos, which was designed to detach, to unplug from that creative capacity. That's the purpose. So we want to unplug from creativity. Yeah.
I remember about it. Are you allowed to open? I think I learned that you only open bags of anything like that if it's related to food. So like if there's a kid that gets like Lego sets come in bags also, like are you allowed to open that bag on Shabbos?
So some people distinguish between food and other things, but opening a bag is ruining a bag, and ripping it is a destructive act. It's okay.
You can't I thought we don't tear them.
So we don't tear constructively. So right. So we don't tear in a way that's constructive. So for instance, tearing open a box on perforations might be a constructive act. Like a tissue box, if you have the perforated lines, tearing on the perforated lines would be a problem. Ripping it open from the side is not a problem.
Like if Maya gets like her PG library,
she can't read it, but she could open it. Can't read it because it contains nonsense, but she could.
Can't read PG.
I'm joking.
Oh, okay.
She can
open that on Shabbos?
When did it arrive? The question is where it came from on Shabbos. Opening mail that arrives on Shabbos is a separate question, because you don't know if it traveled over either the Tchum, outside of the 2,000 amos. You don't know if it traveled outside of the outside the Eruv might be a question, but even outside the Tchum is more of a problem. So you don't know that about things that arrive in Shabbos. Maybe it was in the post office beforehand, probably. But opening something that arrives on Shabbos doesn't have a problem. But opening it up, if it arrived before Shabbos and you didn't open it, it's fine.
Oh, if it came on Friday.
Yeah,
you just didn't
yeah,
translate it.
yeah. It's destructive the way you're opening it. Okay. So Shabbos Ikain Yemei Hasheva Brachos. Shabbos is the Sheva Brachos Shel Chasan V'Kala. So now he's going back to the imagery. We're back away from the Mishkan towards the Shabbos, the Chasan and Kala. In the 7 days that the Chasan and Kala celebrate together, there's actually a prohibition of work during 7 days. I remember some guy told me he couldn't stop working during things, so he brought his bride to work with him every day. I'm sure that was a very nice way to start the relationship. He had her make coffee for him. Rak Chaim Yachad. They live together. B'Shabbos Kodesh Aleinu L'Chayot Im Hashem Yisparach. Ketzad. How do we do that? The Yoshvim Imo Bepratiot Nizharim Shelo Yu Lanu Inyanim Acherim Chutz Mikidusha. The purpose of that week is to make sure there's nothing else that you're focused upon but each other. L'Chayot B'Veito Shel Hashem. And here we're doing that on Shabbos with God in His house to eat from His table. Remember we said God Shulchan, He pays for it. And to know that the clothing wearing on Shabbos is the clothing of the Kohen. If you remember that this is the Shabbos, there's no greatness that you can't achieve because you're sitting at God's table. Now, if you don't have this idea, then it looks like Shabbos is just an empty day. You can't do anything, right? Like a sort of juvenile concept of what Shabbos is. It's so boring, can't do anything on Shabbos. And you're waiting, chalshing for the moment for Shabbos to finish so you can go out and hang out and have a fun time on Motzei Shabbos, right? Because it's torture for some people, right? Because you're not doing it. It's the day of doing nothing. That's not what it is. It's not just a day of hafsaka. It's a day of sitting with Hashem, sitting b'kedusha. It's a day of celebrating. So if you don't have this concept, then it's an empty day. If we go back to the parable of the Chasan and the Kala, what if they don't love each other? So this is the worst thing in the world. Someone actually, I was speaking to someone before they got married, and he said, "I don't know. What if I don't really love her?" And he said, "Because I see that sometimes we're just talking, and sometimes there's nothing to talk about." And he was in panic. He didn't know whether he should go forward. So I said, "Listen, you can't do any better. So just go for it anyway." I said to him that I think that sometimes, first of all, you don't always, in my experience, you don't always have to fill every moment with speech and always say something to one another. But if you can't stand each other's presence, then sitting near each other is torture, even if you say nothing. If you love each other, then you could just sit next to each other and it's wonderful, right? You don't have to say anything. But in kosim echad al sheni, if one is angry at the other one, well, the more so, they can't. Einam yodim echad mikiyumo shel sheni. Hem yuchlu lechayot yachad meshach 25 shanim. Shum kasher lo yivatzer b'neim. They could live together for 25 years and not have a real kasher, not a real connection. So the ability to sit in sacred silence with one another, or just sit next to each other, means that there's a closeness, there's a love. That's what we strive for in our relationship with God on Shabbos. To be able to just sit and enjoy the Shabbos presence. To be able to say, this is great. There's nothing else in the world right now. No one else I'd rather be. Right? Some people, in order for having a good time, they need to do something. I had a good friend when I was young. I thought he was a good friend. I found out he wasn't. And he invited me always to his house. So one time I said, "Why don't you come to my house?" He lived in it's a house triple the size of mine. So he obviously had more games, more fun things to do. But I invited him over. So he said, "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "I don't know. I'm just going to spend time together." So he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he kept going on and on and on. And I realized that unless there was some activity to constantly stimulate, he was not going to be entertained. He didn't want to spend time with me. So that was important to see. And that's why I didn't marry him. Also, I wasn't interested. Yeah. But seriously though, that if you can't stand someone's presence, you can't sit there. So we have to develop a relationship with God where people don't hate sitting with God. Like that's a madrega. We actually could sit with God. The moment davening finishes, you could sit for a few minutes in shul and say Tehillim, right? Or you have to get out. I have two rules about shul. Number one is the moment davening finishes, people dart out. Number two is no matter how much locks you put on a table, it will be finished. Doesn't make it. You could have like pounds and pounds of lox. People just, that's it. Like they've never seen food in their lives. So there's never a rule. Like someone says, do we get enough lox? No, you never got enough lox. Whose house are you living in? Who's your partner? When you light the candles, think for a moment, why am I lighting these things? I'm making a table. Is it for my guests? Right? You know how you know if you're making the table for your guests or for Shabbos, for Hashem. Because you have to decide based on who your guests are, you have to decide whether you're putting out the silverware or the plasticware, right? Or the or which tablecloth you're using, right? And the cheshbon that you put into that decides whether it's being done for a certain person or for God. Bami wrote some lasos roshim. Why am I? What imprint am I trying to make with this dress, with this suit? Who am I trying to impress? Right? That's a good question. It's a hard question to ask yourselves, right? He's coming from a Haredi perspective, but he's saying don't bring a newspaper into Shabbos. I don't necessarily ascribe to that approach. I think that there's certain things that are pleasurable to read. Some things in the news can be pleasurable to read when you're not talking about murder and war and stock market. There's a few human interest stories that are nestled there, or sports things that are maybe can distract you and bring a little joy. But putting that aside, what's appropriate Shabbos material, what's not, he's saying that if you're just trying to do this just for distraction, right? Political Shabbos, not talking about politics in Shabbos. It's the worst. The worst conversation is politics. So, if you do that, then you're actually found in the temple. That's where you're located. And if you go into the Beis Hamikdash, maybe Beis Hashem, and you know I'm in the temple right now, right? You could actually draw the divine spirit from there. If you don't know what the Beis Hamikdash is about, you can see a giant butcher room, right? Giant kitchen. Harbe basar, harbe dam, a lot of blood, a lot of meat, right? It's going to be disgusting, right? Like it would smell. You would think it would smell there. There was one of the nisim of the first bags that didn't smell. There weren't any flies, but you would see a lot of blood, a lot of hanging meat, hooks on the ground, and knives. What do I have to do with this? How am I going to feel that kedusha? If you didn't realize where you are, right? That this is the place where the Akedah took place. This is the place of the temple. Shabbos Kodesh is the Beis Hamikdash. We have to remember that that's where we are. It's the Mikdash Bizman. It's the sanctuary in time. All these 24 hours, when we sit in the Shabbos table, we have to remember that whose house are we at? And the Stira Gadol, the great contradiction, Shabbos is the Dibur Dvarim B'Telem, is to talk about nonsense. We're talking about things that are just not relevant. Even to guard our conversation, not just about Lashon Hara, but to talk about the whole campaign. Don't speak, don't talk evil bad, don't say bad words. All that stuff is okay. That's important. But we're talking about that your Shabbos conversation is elevated. Shar Havalam, Yesh Lizkar Shabbos, Litchonein Likrosa Ve'ofen. I'm not even saying that every conversation is Torah, but when you have a conversation, it should have a purpose, have a point, right? From start to finish, know that there's something you're trying to help in the world or in their family or in your community with that conversation. Kavos Panam Karoi. Because Shabbos Yotzes, when it leaves, you leave also in an appropriate way. Momrim Yafeh Shalom, Shalom Yafeh, Shalom Hashem, goodbye God, right? Uyaveshuv, Yoshuv. Sorry, if you say Yafeh Shalom, if you say it properly, then he'll come back. But if you look at your watch to know when it's going to happen, and the Rambam famously has this idea, says you can be Mishomer Shabbos in every way and be Machal Shabbos. So you go up to your field, stand up to the Tchum. I can only walk 2,000 amos beyond the city limits. I'm going to stand in my field. I'm going to watch the vegetables to make sure no foxes come or predators come to eat my produce. And the moment Shabbos ends, I'm going to jump in the field. I'm going to work. Right? You could do that. I'm going to grab a plane right after Shabbos. I have an appointment. I have a dinner. I have a movie. I'm running right after Shabbos. So I'm sitting the whole time. When is it going to happen? And now, right? And I run. And that attitude, that idea, so we've suggested that it's torture. I cannot wait to get out of this house. Can't wait to get out of this prison. And think about the message we give to children, right? When we say that we start to make preparations, or even you're packing it and you start to put some items away and pack bags on Shabbos. Forget about the fact that you're not allowed to prepare on Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos. But the statement is that you've got to get out of this prison. It's torture. That's the bracha we make for bar mitzvah boy or bar mitzvah girl when they become of age. I don't want to go through this thing again. All right? Good riddance. Imrak lo naharos Shabbos hakol yavo me'atzmo. If you don't destroy it, it all comes on its own. Shabbos Kodesh, Hashem's already there. Tzmuna b'yom hazeh gadlus ein sofit. There's an endless greatness. Ava ein sofit, the great endless love. Dveikut ein sofit, endless place of connection. One of the most important themes that we work with in terms of trying to root out bad habits or understand origins of sort of problems in our lives is to go back to the attachment theory and to why certain corrosive attachments or failed attachments happen when we were young. This is one of the most important psychological theories. People have anxious attachments. People have attachments that were formulated based on abandonment. Right? The idea that I didn't get the love I needed when I was young, and therefore I formulated an anxious attitude towards the world. Right? So Shabbos is actually the ultimate attachment moment. It's a moment to reclaim that love that you've been looking for, right? Because you didn't get it from your parents, or because it was given to a sibling, or because whatever it was, right? There were more important things going on. And I think he's hitting on that idea that if you just realize that the chasam and kala sitting, it's not a torture. I think there's an incredible experience that's waiting. And on the surface level, it all appears as if Shabbos is just a day when you can't do the things you want to do. But that's like the worst thing you could ever do with the day, right? Try to fill it with meaningless time. Okay, questions?
Yeah. Notice you skipped over reading secular book.
I didn't skip it over. I read, he was talking about newspapers. He didn't mention secular book here in this one, the Hebrew. Did he? I'll see what maybe I just read too quickly. Okay, I didn't mean to skip it over. Yeah, so he, so again, there are positions in the poskim certainly that to read this sort of thing is a problem. The way we generally hold is if it's something that interests you, right? Not just because it's a distraction, but interests you genuinely, whether it's like a science book or whether it's a history book, things like that, then you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. It enhances the experience of Shabbos. If it's something that you're doing because you have to get schoolwork done, or because you have some reading that you have to do for an important meeting that you have taking place on Monday, or because it's just something that's just completely inappropriate, bichlal, let alone for Shabbos, then I think that would be something that's wrong. So again, he's coming from a very insular Haredi community, and what is deemed inappropriate as Shabbos material might not be inappropriate for you and I. So one has to know that each person has that level of I'm not denigrating his approach. It's a great level to be at. I'm personally not on that level. Like I could pick up an article and be fascinated by it and feel connected. But if I was living in a world where 24/7 all I was doing was sitting in Kollel, then perhaps that would be very inappropriate to pick up a secular book on Shabbos. Okay.
Also, you mentioned kind of in passing that the point in the first is also where the occasion is.
Yeah. Same site.